and if she comes in, then she can take over. But this is for the November 10th meeting, APCD, and roll call.
Board Member Bennett?
Here.
Board Member Foy? Here.
Oh, long time delivery.
Board Member Heikkinen?
Here.
Board Member Long?
Here.
Board Member Morgan?
Here.
Board Member Parks?
Here.
Board Member Pollock?
Here.
Board Member Sharkey?
Present.
Board Member Tucker? Board Member Zaragoza?
Here.
Board Member Ramirez?
Okay, we have a quorum. Let's stand. Next item is the minutes. Has everybody had a chance to look at the minutes?
Move to approve.
Second.
Got a first and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved, and we're going to wait for the chair on item 5.
15 seconds of glory.
Well done, John.
You needed it.
Outstanding.
Okay,
There she is.
we're on item number 5, Madam Chair.
Apologies.
It's all right.
Fine. So it's agenda review. Consider and approve by majority vote any revisions minor to the board items or attachments. Do members have any changes, suggestions? I used to running. Anymore? No? I see none. All approved. Do we'll just approve
Move to
it?
approve.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
That passes. Item 6, public comment. I don't see any speaker cards. None? All right, so we'll move on to board comments. Please, somebody have a comment so I can catch my breath.
We have clean air today, very clean.
Wow, beautiful.
Thank you. Okay.
We had clean air on Saturday, didn't we?
Yes, we
Wasn't that
did. Do you want
beautiful?
to talk about that, Supervisor Long?
It's somewhat air quality in that we did a renaming of 2 significant channels, waterways that intersect the Ormond Beach Wetlands Restoration Site and the J Street Drain, and they're now called one is called the Chumash Creek, and it's in the original spelling of Chumash, Tsumas, and the other one is called the Ormond Beach Waterways. Right, Waterways Lagoon. Anyway, while we were out there at the site off of Perkins Road, you could see the island so crystal clear. Just our air was just breathtakingly beautiful.
It was. We do have to thank the winds, however, they bring other issues, like pollen. Thank you. Thank you, Member Long. Other comments from anyone? No? Thanks. Okay.
Hard to give up the Oxnard industrial drain.
Oh, we will never speak the D word again. I will never say it again.
I'm glad you're doing that.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, good job.
Yes.
You and Kathy did a good job.
Thank you. We missed you, but we knew where you were. and
I was out here with the
appreciate that.
firefighters.
Right, correct.
Right, and, right? With the
Thank
mayor,
you.
I was with the mayor and Steve Bennett.
All right.
Right. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the item 8, public hearing regarding approval of 2015 Ventura County Triennial Assessment and Plan Update. Mr. Villegas.
Chair Ramirez, members of the board, Mike Villegas, Air Pollution Control Officer, good afternoon. This is our triennial assessment of our program under the California Clean Air Act. Basically, the California Clean Air Act requires us every 3 years to check our progress towards air quality. And it addresses only the California Clean Air Act and the California specific air quality standards. The reporting period for this assessment is 2012 through 2014. Basically, we need to make a finding that reactor organic gas and nitrogen oxide emissions are continuing to decrease in the county, and we're seeing improvements in air quality. We also have to make a review of our control measures so that we can make a finding that we're implementing all feasible measures. I'm going to talk a bit about the state standards. There's actually two standards for ozone in California. There is a 1-hour standard at 0.09 parts per million or 90 parts per billion, and an 8-hour standard set at 0.07 ppm or 70 parts per billion. And if you remember at last month's board meeting, I briefed you on the new federal standard that is averaged over 8 hours at 70 parts per billion, equivalent to the California standard. But a standard's more than just the standard. It's also how you measure it. And what I discussed at the last meeting is how the federal standard is based on your design value, which is a 3-year average of your 4th highest day, which is the 98th percentile. Now, the California standard is basically a not to exceed, so it's based on your highest day averaged over 3 years, something to keep in mind. And in order to be designated attainment with the California standards, you need to meet both the 1-hour and the 8-hour. This shows the progress we're making on the 1-hour state standard. And as you can see, steady decrease over the years. Basically, all the sites except Simi Valley are at or below the California 1-hour standard. And this is really a standard when you think of it as just you're trying to not have any more very high exceedances even for 1 hour. When you look at the 8-hour standard, once again, we're making great progress. But as you can see, only El Rio attains the state 8-hour standard. And this is different when I talk to you about the federal 8-hour standard, where Thousand Oaks area, the Conejo Valley, also attained the federal 8-hour standard. But that's based, as I said, on the 4th highest day, and California on the highest day period.
Does smoke from fires affect these figures?
Okay, this is ozone, and it's interesting. When you think of smoke from fires, obviously particulate matter. But fires, any combustion, also releases nitrogen oxides. So EPA is working on something I'm going to brief you on in the future called their exceptional events regulation, because during a wildfire, you get high levels of nitrogen oxides, which can lead to additional ozone formation. You actually might have lower ozone right near the fire because NOx can break it down, but at some distance from the fire, you could have elevated levels of ozone. So it could play into both pollutants. This slide is just showing the percent reduction at each of our monitoring stations. As you can see, we're doing quite well at all of them, but the progress in Ojai and Piru has not quite been as great as Simi Valley, El Rio, and Thousand Oaks. And when you think about Ojai, it's like Simi in that it's ringed by mountains, but the mountains in the Ojai are substantially higher, there's no doubt. So I think you've just got a deeper bowl, and you have an increased chance of getting an inversion layer and trapped pollutants in the Ojai Valley. And both Ojai and Simi hot and sunny during the summer.
Could I ask a question about that? We seem to have less and less marine fog layers. Does that have an impact in keeping the ozone at more measurable standard levels?
That's a really interesting question. I've seen situations where we have a marine layer on the coast, and you kind of have that, it lingers, kind of the June gloom effect. And it actually leads to, sometimes we have stagnant air in those conditions. So we've actually, under some of those conditions, we've seen very good air quality on the coast, and then Simi enters with a problem on that. But I'm going to talk to my meteorologist and get back to you on that.
Madam Chair, how about, Mike, El Rio? El Rio is what, a couple of miles away from the ocean, and
Yes, what you find is very good air quality. Basically, I haven't looked at the peak, El Rio from the state standard, but the design value at El Rio is about 60 parts per billion.
60 parts.
Well under the state and federal. So basically, if you live in Ventura, Oxnard, Port Hueneme, and Camarillo, you're
Good air.
breathing very good air.
Yeah, all right.
Seems like the air quality is affected most by the weather and topography, not by the emitters. Being close to a freeway, you would think El Rio would have worse air quality, but it's just, it's all the
Yeah, the coastal
You do have
exterior
the coastal
environmental.
breeze, and the
Yeah.
coastal breeze takes the emissions. You know, we've got oil production on the plain, we've got power plants, you've got several large industrial sources on the Oxnard Plain, and the coastal breeze takes that up to Santa Rosa, up to Santa Clara Valley, and, yep.
Interesting.
Actually, your breeze comes from the west, and remember, the west is out toward Ventura. When you're looking from there, the breeze comes that direction, not coming from the southeast, I mean, the
It actually,
southwest.
when you look at the maps that we used to have in our old air quality
Yeah.
management plans, it's amazing. It just, you're right, some of it crosses
Right.
South Oxnard, kind of almost back towards South Coast, but on some days it does kind of come up towards Camarillo and the whole. So we get this, basically emissions on the coast are impacting our inland valleys. The situation I think you have in Piru is, if you go back to 1988, I don't think there was much of a Valencia or a Santa Clarita. And if you go back to 1988, the I-5 really flowed, and now it looks like you're in downtown LA. And when you have substantial growth, that mitigates the effect of reducing emissions. And you see the exact same thing when you look at the 8-hour standard, the progress at each monitoring site. This is just days over the state standard, and when we take out that 3-year average, suddenly the effects year to year of meteorology can play quite a bit. That's why you see the jagged line declining there. That's the 2 standards going down. The yellow line is the increase in county population. It's basically doubled. We're still making great progress on air quality, but I think it's nice to look at the year to year, and you can really see the difference between a hot summer and a mild summer, or the summer we just had with a lot of tropical moisture. It basically gives us good atmospheric mixing, and we don't see inversions in the inland valley, so the number of days over the standard decreases. For me, this is the money slide. This is, if you're going to take something away from this presentation, this is it. Bottom line, our current projections show that emissions of both reactive organic gases and nitrogen oxides are going to keep decreasing through 2035, although with reactive organic gases after 2020, the line is really leveling off. One of the things that is very positive here is recent air modeling runs are showing areas such as Ventura County, we actually get more benefit from NOx reductions than we're getting pound for pound with reactive organic compounds. So we should continue to see air quality improvements. The other thing I wanted you to note is currently we're putting together our air quality management plan, which will be coming to your board next year for the federal standard. So we'll be coming up with new emission forecasts and inventory forecasts. As part of this assessment, we look at our rule book, and we call this an assessment for all feasible measures, but basically what we do is we take our rule book, we compare it to the rule books in San Joaquin and South Coast, so those are 2 extreme non-attainment areas. Also the Bay Area, Santa Barbara, our neighbor to the north, and Sacramento Metropolitan, which is another large air district. And we make sure that everything they're proposing to implement, we're looking at, and if it's feasible and cost-effective here in the county, we implement it also. And this is one time I'd like to point out a difference between the federal and California Clean Air Acts. The California Clean Air Act was basically promulgated in 1988. And the lawmakers realized that California districts have been working hard on this problem for quite a while. And they set a goal that any non-attainment area should reduce their emissions by 5% a year. But they realized in Southern California and in large part in the San Joaquin Valley, the districts were already moving as aggressively as they could. So they said, if you can't show a reduction of 5% a year, just make the finding that you're implementing all feasible measures. Federal Clean Air Act, written in 1970, updated in 1977 and 1990, says you need to reduce your emissions 3% a year every year, and if you can't, we don't give you an out. And it looks like we're going to be able to continue to make that out through about 2021 through through the old federal standard, which we're working on a plan for. But at some point, Congress is going to have to sit down and actually work on this act, because it's 25 years ago since they touched this, and they're not leaving the districts an out. And it's obvious that in California, South Coast, here, San Joaquin, we can't keep up this pace. Here are the 3 rules we identified for enhancement. 2 of them are coding rules, architectural coding, and that's the painting used on buildings such as office buildings, homes, schools. And then coatings used in the aerospace manufacturing operations. We'll be lowering some limits there. And then our Rule 71-2, which deals with basically the storage of petroleum products, so floating roof tanks. So we'll be tightening that rule up on the leak definition. And we have one other rule that's going to deal with nitrogen oxide sources. We're getting ready to actually put this draft out to the public next month. And it's going to achieve a fair amount of nitrogen oxide emission reductions, and I think it's going to help us on that path. But this, coupled with Carl Moyer and everything the state and the feds are doing, I think it's going to get us there, but it's still a tough road to go. In conclusion, ozone levels continue to improve, emissions continue to drop. We're going to continue to implement all feasible measures. We work very closely with industry in doing this to make sure we're not causing any undue economic impacts. And bottom line, we did not identify any deficiencies in the plan. With that, I'll take any questions.
None? Comments? I'll venture one. Last week I was in Los Angeles. I usually take Metrolink for meetings, but I couldn't because it didn't get me back in time. And I just saw the worsening traffic from our county into downtown LA. And it just seems to me that's the big answer here, getting more people out of current models and getting into electric vehicles. Tonight on our agenda in Oxnard, we're considering charging for electric vehicle stations, and my recommendation is that we don't charge. We do everything possible to encourage, though I do recognize that some of the charging stations' electricity comes from sources that are also producing some of these things. So more and more going forward, got to get out of our cars, but that's what's going to be required. So,
Madam Chairman, while you're speaking of that, did anyone see the news last night where it shows the first hydrogen car hit the road? Nice looking car, and it goes 300 miles before you have to put it back, refill it, and that's pretty good. That's excellent, in fact, and it goes faster than most cars. So I'm going, what's wrong with that car? Anyway, it looks good, sounds good. It's about 50 to 60,000. So,
Cheaper than
yeah, cheaper than a Mercedes.
cheaper than a Tesla.
Tesla.
But 300 miles without fill-up, that's pretty good.
When are you going to buy one?
And where do you fill it up?
Well, you'll have hydrogen. We have a few in the state. There's a couple. There's one up north, and one, and of course, down south, there's a couple. But if you can go 300 miles, shoot, I'll just head up there and hit the one that's up there.
Just to second what Mike's talking about, when I gave you the presentation on light-duty vehicles, the state of California is, they're betting the farm on hydrogen.
Yep.
When you look at their projections, they're showing that EVs will come into the market and become a small percentage of the market, but the future for them is fuel cell vehicles.
I didn't know how long it went without a fill-up until I heard that. And also that was fast. It's not a little slow thing. It's a fast vehicle. So,
Other comments, questions? Hearing none, so thank you, Mr. Villegas. What's the pleasure of the board? Public hearing. I have no speaker cards. If anybody would like to speak, please come forward. Seeing none. We have a motion to approve and a second. Shall we vote? Do we need a roll call, Mr. Villegas? No?
Pleasure of the chair.
Okay, it's all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes. Thank you very much. Going on to item 9, public hearing regarding adoption of proposed revisions to Rule 2613, new source review. Yes,
Good afternoon, Chair Ramirez, members of the board. My name is Tyler Harris. I'm an air quality engineer with the district. I'm here to present proposed amendments to Rule 26.13, new source review, prevention of significant deterioration. This board adopted Rule 26.13 in June of 2011. The district's intention at the time was to facilitate the delegation of prevention of significant deterioration, or PSD, permitting authority to the district. However, US EPA found deficiencies in Rule 26.13 and requested changes which have been presented here. Additional minor editorial changes have been included in the proposed amendments. The purpose of the PSD program is to protect air quality while allowing economic growth. Rule 26.13 adopts the federal PSD rule, 40 CFR, section 52.21. And the requested change includes those additional provisions EPA requires for the district to implement the federal PSD program. The PSD program applies to new major sources and significant modifications to major sources of attainment criteria pollutants. So in this program, a major source is one which emits 100 tons or 250 tons per year of attainment criteria pollutants, depending on the type of facility. In Ventura County, PSD applies to particulate matter, nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and lead. The central provision of PSD is a requirement that new sources apply best available control technology, or BACT, to all PSD pollutants. A project subject to PSD will require a PSD permit regardless of the issuing agency. And since PSD applies to new sources or new projects, we cannot predict and don't know if a project subject to PSD will occur in the district, or when or if. But the main effect of these rule amendments, if adopted, will be to allow a PSD project proponent to submit one application to the district for a PSD permit, rather than, as now required, they would submit a PSD application to EPA and an authority to construct application to the district. So this will streamline the permitting process and will likely be a benefit to the regulated community. Costs for applicants will increase since the district applies Rule 42 permit fees to all of our permit activities, and US EPA does not charge fees for PSD permits. So the increase in fees will be related to staff time required for air quality modeling, because currently we would not do air quality monitoring on an authority to construct. The EPA would conduct that part of the review. The proposed revisions were presented to the advisory committee, and the advisory committee recommended unanimously to adopt. We received no public comments on the proposed revisions, and that's all I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
thank you. Member comments, questions? So this is also a public hearing. I have no speaker cards. If anybody would wish to address the board on this issue, please come forward. I don't see anyone, so what's the pleasure of the board?
Second.
We have a motion, and I'll just ask, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Thank you. We'll go to item 10, approval of and authorization for the Air Pollution Control Officer to sign an interagency information sharing agreement with California Air Resources Board and the California Energy Commission to enable the agencies to share information in developing a plan to comply with US EPA's Clean Power Plan. Mr. Villegas.
Yes, actually, we're going to continue this item until our next meeting. We had an information sharing agreement worked out with all the districts and the Energy Commission and ARB, and right after the deadline, South Coast Council actually made some improvements, I think, and our council certainly agreed with them, so we're going to have to bring this back to your board in December. I just want you to know that the Clean Power Plan is very controversial. 26 states, 16 industry and union organizations are suing the EPA over this. This is the project to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. But from the California perspective, I want you to know one thing. EPA wants folks to move away from coal towards renewables, hydro, solar, wind, and natural gas. And when you look at California, CARB has made an initial look at this, and it looks like we already meet the 2030 standards under the Clean Power Plan. So this should be pretty straightforward.
Thank you. Questions?
Move to continue?
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you. Thank you. We'll move on to item 11, public hearing regarding the adoption of a resolution establishing fiscal year 2015-2016 service rates and fees for the APCD effective today.
Yes. Pursuant to Health and Safety Code, the district is permitted to recover our costs for services we provide pursuant to our mandates under the federal and California Clean Air Act. The amount of revenue we collect is directly a function of the amount of services we're required to provide to permittees, in essence. There are three main charges in this proposal. First, the service rates for worker classifications, which are called the service hourly rates, duplication fees, and miscellaneous fees. And real quick, there are no changes to the duplication fees, which relate to copying charges for Public Records Act requests and subpoenaed records, and there are no changes to the miscellaneous fees, which would cover witness fees and fees for bad checks. On the salary side, we're seeing a 3.3% increase for the salary, the composite rate for our engineer. And this is the key number if you're out in the regulated community, because this is the worker classification that processes permits. And the 3.3% increase is directly linked to the salary negotiations that were approved by your board with VEA. There were salary increases, and there was an increase in the cafeteria plan, so we're looking at a 3.3% increase. Now, when you look at the other classifications in the district, there's two others that are relevant, the air quality specialist and the air quality instrument tech. Under Health and Safety Code, they're actually linked back to a section that requires that their fee increase can be no greater than the California Consumer Price Index. And as you're aware, with the drop in energy costs, the California price CPI, we're looking at a 0.008% increase. So basically, we're not proposing any change to those service rates. That's all I have. I'll be happy to take questions.
Any questions from the members? This is also a public hearing, and I'd ask if anyone would like to address the board, please come forward. I have no speaker cards, so not seeing anyone coming forward. What's the pleasure of the board?
I'll move for approval.
Just a great job in containing these fees and
Thank
meeting the
you.
mission still with the rates and fees.
Thank you. I agree. So all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? No. Great. So that passes. We're on to last item, item 12, receive and file the minutes of South Coast Basin-wide Air Pollution Control Council meeting. So,
approval.
thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We have one last item?
I was just going to mention, we do have a standing committee today.
Yes.
And just to let you know, we are going to meet in December. It looks like the building purchase agreement will be moving forward. And I just want to let you know, you're going to be getting a couple emails from me. It looks like the Beijing Environmental Protection Bureau wants to pay us a visit out here in Ventura County, December 16th.
Who does?
So I'll be letting you know right away if you want to meet with these folks.
This is a second group now. We just had one that came from Shanghai, visit in Camarillo, looking at our sewer plant and other things.
And thank you. And I'll just finally say welcome Mayor Cheryl Heitman to her first meeting, second meeting. It just felt like the first, according to Supervisor Parks. Thank you, welcome. And we're adjourned. Thank you.
That was quick. Quick one.